Indian trading post and bought each of us a cheap beaded belt. My younger brother Ronnie threw a big fit because he wanted a cowboy hat. My dad said the belts were all that he could afford, but that didn't stop my brother from whining and crying about not getting a cowboy hat. Back in the road and about 5 miles of my brother's crying and whining, my dad reached across the back seat and said, "Let me see that belt." Ronnie laid the belt across my dad's outstretched hand, the same hand that could smack the shit right out of one of us without even looking, and with one fluid action, his hand holding the belt flew to the steering wheel. His left hand cranked the window down. Throwing the belt into the void, he said, "Okay, fuck it. Are you happy now?" The hungry highway quickly gobbled up the belt, burped, and said, "Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much," in a pretty damn good Elvis impersonation to the ass of the beast as it retreated into the gathering gloom of sunset. The beast's taillights switched on, trailing a warm red glow, kissing the road like the king that it truly was. And the beast drove on, minus one beaded belt. From Flagstaff, we headed south into the blazing Arizona desert. The beast sweated and groaned, and the blast furnace heat sucked the life right out of us. The giant saguaros stood stolidly watching as we passed, passive and resigned like thorny, spine-covered souls burning in the hot sands of hell. The beast carried its burden, fleeing into the perspective of the wet, shimmering mirage of Interstate 10, the California border, and the greater, greener fields of my father's dreams. The old white Pontiac was just crossing the Colorado River outside Blythe, California, when a whirring, swishing, slapping snare sound began growing louder and louder, forcing the beast onto the shoulder of the road. All four of the doors opened and the beast spit us out. We all gathered behind our father at a safe distance as he knelt at the front passenger side tire. I could see there was about 8 inches of metal mesh protruding from the oh-so-thin layer of rubber that was between us and a blowout. I think you could have, at that point, just poked your finger right through the tire and it would have been grateful to have expired. The layer that separates all things from each other just doesn't get any thinner than that. After inspecting the tire, my dad stood, spit into the dirt, and cursed the whole world and his rotten fucking luck. Then ordered everyone back into the car, got in himself, slammed the door, pulled back onto the highway, and drove away hunched over the steering wheel. My memory of him, his long hair, his dark blue bandana low on his forehead, and my stepmother with her evil black widow's peak and red lipstick, and us 5 ragamuffin children in the back seat, riding in the easy-bake oven on wheels, and the slapping snare sound of the steel mesh spanking the road like a bad dog will forever be forged into my memory, as bright and hot as that California sun. On a wing in my father's prayers, the beast rolled all the way into Orange County, California, about 200 miles away, on a highway that was as hot as a crack pipe on payday. And believe it or not, the tire held out. And just in case you were wondering why my dad didn't have the tire fixed or put a spare on the beast, well, the answer is because our dad was so broke that if someone was selling 4 brand new tires across the street that day for a nickel, all my dad could have done would be to stand there, look across the street, and say, "Ain't that cheap?" The beast limped into Orange County. Our parents went to the sheriff's department for help and were escorted to a local gas station where the sheriff paid for a used tire to replace the bad one. While the tire was being changed, one of the deputies took my brother, Donnie, and me to the store and bought each of us 5 kids a cold soda. I was looking out the back window at the deputies as the gas jockey finished putting the few dollars of gas, courtesy of the sheriff's Traveler's Aid Fund, into the car. They sure looked smart in their starched, creased khaki uniforms with their shiny gold badges. With the new, used tire, the beast began to pull away. I was still watching the deputies through the back window when I saw them digging into their pockets. One of them spoke to the fuel jockey, who in turn hollered for my father to stop. So my dad stopped, put the beast into reverse, and rolled slowly back to the pumps. The attendant leaned into his window and said, "The deputies pooled their own money and want to fill the tank for you." Now, if that doesn't warm your heart, nothing will. Those guys were awesome for doing that for our dad, but I'm pretty sure it was because he had us kids with him. The deputies stood in the wilting heat in their sharp uniforms beside the attendant in his dark green coveralls and waved to the 5 hot children, each holding a cold soda. as the white Pontiac pulled out of the station with a full belly and a new shoe. The beast pulled into Baldwin Park, California, like a bloodhound on the trail of an escaped convict, sniffing, circling, and searching for that perfect spot to land. It found the parking lot of a supermarket, circled a couple of times, and snuggled up to one of the light poles. Imagine looking down from the top of the light pole and seeing, from a bird's-eye view, the rusty white beast sitting in a pool, a halo of yellow-white light, surrounded by blackness of asphalt and darkness of night. Inside the beast's belly, all souls are sleeping except for one young boy and his parents. My father sits silhouetted by the vapors of the light, reading a newspaper, and my stepmother looks out her window into the night. I feel the weight of their thoughts and fears. In the still of the night, the only sound is the dry rustling of newspaper as my father turns pages and the small noises of children sleeping. A new sound comes to the beast as the long fingers of the wind pushes and nudges an aluminum can somewhere in the dark. Creeping on stealthy musical feet, the can tinkles and scrapes across the blacktop of the parking lot, and I recognize this sound as company for a lonely night. I feel my father's fears and hopes and dreams, and all and everything became one with the sound. Growing bolder, the tinkling sound of the erratic melody becomes a siren song that causes my father to lower his paper. In harmony with the tinkling sound and the heaviness of the night, he is still for a moment, listening deeply to the sound. Then I hear him say in almost a whisper, "That is the loneliest sound in the world." My father's words fell into my young imagination like a bit of grit falling into an oyster, and over time it formed this little pearl of a story. So, if you ever hear an old pop can being blown across a parking lot or down a street or along a sidewalk, pause for a moment, listen to the sound, and reflect upon this story of my father sitting in that car with 5 children and the sound of that can being blown across the parking lot. Then you, too, will hear the loneliest sound in the world. You may have laughed or you may have cried, but I hope you enjoyed that little pearl of a story. Author's Commentary. My father named me after himself, but I am Carl with a K, and he was Carl with a C. The youngest of 7 children, my dad was born September 26, 1934 in Lawrence, Kansas, to Otis and Mabel Wiggins. The story I remember best about my father's childhood was of his long summers rounding up cows and working the fields where he worked from can to can't. For those of you who don't know what can to can't means, it's working from the time you can see till the time you can't. My father would say, "You kids are lucky you don't know what real work is." Hell, when I was a boy, I had to be up at 4 o'clock in the morning and round up milk cows from the fields. I'd be soaking wet and cold from the wet grass, my feet sloshing in my shoes. Then I'd come in and your grandma would fix us breakfast. Then we'd work all day long harvesting wheat or oats. He would go on and on about how hard they worked as children. "There were no summer vacations for us," he'd say. "We worked our asses off all summer, and you know what I got at the end of the summer?" Yes, of course, we knew because we'd heard it a million times. All he got after working all summer was 3 pairs of khakis. His reward, those 3 pairs of pants, had to last the entire school year. He could wear 1 pair Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and the second pair Thursday and Friday, with the last pair for the weekend. We hated hearing these horror stories. Behind our father's back, we would mock him. "Oh, yes," one of my brothers would say. "We were so poor all I had to wear was a gunny sack, and I couldn't go to school every day because I had to share that one gunny sack with my brothers." That would throw us into fits of laughter. Then one of my other brothers would say, "You kids got it so easy. We didn't even have school buses when we were kids. We had to walk 5 miles to school in the snow, and it was uphill, both ways." To which another would add, "Yes, and we didn't even have shoes to wear. On icy days, we had to wrap barbed wire around our feet just to get up the hills." Boy, we'd be rolling on the floor laughing until we had tears in our eyes. Each generation has its childhood horror stories. My grandfather's generation told stories about how tough life was because they had to fetch water in buckets from the river and heat it over a fire in the hearth so they could wash dishes. My father's generation complained of having to fetch water from the well and heat it in the reservoir of the wood-fired stove. My generation told their own tales of woe about having to turn on a faucet and wash dishes by hand. My son's generation complains about having to rinse dishes and walk all the way across the kitchen and put them in the dishwasher. Kids these days make the trip to the dishwasher sound like it's a journey across the Mojave Desert walking barefoot over broken glass. And so it goes. I can't imagine what the next few generations will tell their children, but I'd guess my great-great-great-grandchildren might tell their children something like this. You kids got it so easy these days. You don't have any idea what suffering and hard work is like, because when we were kids, we actually had to push a button for the robotic butler to clear the table and wash the dishes. So how can you complain that the virtual 3D Genie 3200 takes 5 milliseconds to dissolve and reprint your dishes right at the table without having to do anything but ask? Jesus, you kids are just spoiled rotten. And so it goes. Chapter 4. Beep Beep Roadrunner. On the morning of the last day of school in my 9th grade year, the energy was electric, buzzing from one student to the next. I could hardly concentrate sitting there in the fluorescent-lit classroom. The crank-out windows were open, books were being turned in, yearbooks were being signed, and the dusty chalkboard stood silent behind the teacher. Wicked old metal Venetian blinds were half raised and half opened, slicing through the warm sunlight like fresh-baked bread. The sound of mowers and the smell of fresh-cut grass rode on the notes of the robin's song, announcing spring had arrived. The teacher droned on, his words completely lost to me as I sat at my desk surrounded by all the last day of school activity, students making promises to stay in touch with each other and what plans were for the summer vacation. The school PA system crackled with static announcements, which were also lost to me. I was daydreaming about going home to a house full of love, the smell of chocolate chip cookies baking in the oven, and a glass of cold milk. But right about then the school bell rang and I was forced to come back to reality. I was going home, but not to a loving stepmother, or milk or cookies. Doors burst open, classrooms emptied, and boys and girls spilled into the hallways to the sounds of lockers slamming. Shoes squeaked on polished hallway floors and shouts and laughter echoed throughout the building. The outer doors burst open and kids bolted from the school like wild mustangs. My brothers and my sister and I walked home, pushing and shoving each other, kicking dandelions and laughing. Some of the richer kids drove cars, and they honked their horns and yelled from open windows as they drove by. Sure, we knew we were poor. But hell, almost everyone we knew was poor, and back then hardly anyone had a car, let alone a new one. The 5 of us raced home and arrived one at a time, according to who was the fastest. The kitchen screen door slammed not once, but 5 times, once for each of us boys and once for our sister Julie. There was no milk, no cookies, and no loving mother with a bright smile welcoming us home. Obviously, I'd watched too many Leave It to Beaver episodes. We hit the kitchen like a swarm of locusts, eating everything we could find. Like a smash and grab, we were in and out quickly before we could get caught. Then 4 more slams of the screen door as we boys left the kitchen with our dad yelling, "Stop slamming that fucking screen door!" The first nights of summer vacation were always the best. The cicadas hummed and buzzed in deafening crescendos on those hot, humid Kansas nights. On these nights, we went shirtless, sweating and running through the neighborhood, knocking on doors and running like hell. We would hide in the tall grass that grew between the houses just to watch the homeowner come out onto the porch and stand there under the swarm of bugs that flew kamikaze crazy patterns into the porch light. My brothers and I would fight to be quiet so as to not give ourselves away, but it was just too funny to watch the homeowner look around calling, "Who's there?" while the June bugs and miller moths dive-bombed their heads. Lying in the grass, sweating and itching, we would pull foxtails from their sockets and chew on the soft, sweet ends, laughing like hyenas, and talk about what we might be having for dinner when we got home. The 4 of us boys shared a large upstairs bedroom in the old run-down 2-story white house at the end of a gravel road. A couple of my stepmother's sisters and their children, and 1 or 2 of our cousins would usually come to the house on the weekends bringing their guitars. The adults would sit around the big table and play cards, drink, smoke cigarettes, and play music. Those nights were filled with June bugs and slamming screen doors as children ran in and out of the house with our father yelling, "Stop slamming that fucking screen door and stay out of that refrigerator." One night that summer, the adults were downstairs and the four of us boys were upstairs in our barn-shaped bedroom where the walls were painted candy apple red. We were smoking dope and listening to Three Dog Night on the turntable, doing a number called Mama Told Me Not to Come. Blacklight posters glowed and incense and marijuana smoke rolled and Three Dog Night flowed. In the middle of the song, we realized the pounding beat we were hearing was really someone pounding on the door. Feet scrambled to hide the weed and paraphernalia, and hands went to opening windows. The arm of the record player was grabbed, the needle scratching and tearing across the 45, leaving only the sound of someone with a can of air freshener fogging the room like a crop duster. How funny we all must have looked trying to hide all that smoke. A bunch of red-eyed little monkeys swimming around in thick smoke trying to carry armfuls of it and toss it out the window. Man, that was some funny shit. Until the door opened, and I saw my scary stepmother standing there with her hands on her hips, backlit by the hallway light, her evil black widow's peak pointed right at us. With one hand, she reached around and flicked on the light switch, and in the naked, bright light she said in her evil stepmother voice, "This little party is over." My older stepbrother, Rodney, was hauled away a few days later and was taken to the drug and alcohol program at the boys' home in Osawatomie, Kansas. Through the long, hot summer days, life went on without our brother, and that suited me just fine. The weeks flew by. One day, my other two brothers, Donnie and Ronnie, and I were hanging out in the front yard when we heard a rumbling in the distance. We heard it before we could see it. We stopped what we were doing, and all eyes turned toward the dirt road leading up to our house. An old red truck with the rods knocking and the engine coughing was roaring toward the house, and oh boy, that thing was smoking. I'm not talking about little wisps or puffs here and there as it accelerated. I'm talking about smokescreen amounts of bluish-white billowing clouds of exhaust. As soon as my brothers and I saw it, we fell out laughing, rolling on the ground. The truck slowed near the house where, overrun by dust and bluish-white exhaust smoke, it turned left into our driveway in a dramatic display of smoke, dust, rust rod knocks, and backfires. The truck slid to a stop, huffing, puffing, choking, hiccuping, coughing, and gasping like a chain-smoking emphysema patient. As the truck began to appear from the cloud of dust, we watched it shimmy and shudder like a big red dog shaking water from its coat. It eyed us suspiciously as it danced a death jig to the violent rod knocks and backfires. After it had stopped rocking back and forth, the door slowly creaked open. Out stepped our father. The look he gave us as he walked to the house caused us to hold our breath until the screen door slammed. In a final gasp, the truck backfired one more time, a rod knocked, and one last puff of bluish-white smoke exploded from the tailpipe. The truck closed its eyes, shimmied, and died. That sent my brothers into spasms of belly-busting laughter, but I stood still and quiet with my hands at my side, looking at the truck that still had dust settling on it. Just behind the cab, in front of the back tires and strapped to the side of the truck sitting on a little platform were 2 5-gallon cans, one on each side, clearly marked oil. I could see the crude painting of a Roadrunner's head on the passenger door with the words "beep beep" etched in black. My heart sank just looking at that piece of shit sitting in the driveway. I could imagine it clearly in my mind's eye, full of personal effects, clothes, mattresses, trunks, maybe a sewing machine, and a rocking chair on top of the mayhem of belongings, with a bunch of children hanging on for dear life as it backfired, smoked, shook, and rattled and rolled down the road, like life imitating art in a more modern-day version of the Grapes of Wrath. We all walked over for a closer look, shirtless to the merciless sun, with our bare feet stirring up powder-fine dirt into little clouds. If we hadn't seen with our own eyes that the truck rolled into the driveway under its own power, we would have found it hard to believe it had a pulse. The rusted, red, oxidized body set on tires that were as smooth as a hard-boiled egg. I wondered, what's up with the Roadrunners? On the driver's door was a Roadrunner, like from Wile E. Coyote cartoon fame, with the words "beep beep" painted in black. The Roadrunners were painted in geometric patterns in bold primary colors of red, yellow, and blue, and they stood stark against all the rust and fade of the truck. My brothers couldn't stop laughing, but not me. No, sir. I was sad as fuck. One afternoon, a few days later, we were called into the house where we were told that Rodney had ran away from the boys' home, and the family would be packing only the essentials and leaving town. As if in a fire drill, we packed only our essential clothing and bedding and started loading the truck. My biggest heartbreak was leaving our beloved dog behind. My brothers and I had rescued him from the streets and named him Luby. Although he was only a small mixed breed, he was very protective of us, to the point that he would attack anyone who tackled us during the neighborhood football games. We loved that dog and he loved us. You may be wondering what kind of name Luby is. Well, we named him after a guy we had gone to junior high school with, Luby Welks, also known as the Headbutt King. Back in 7th grade, he was known for spontaneous headbutting, and everyone was scared shitless of him. So we named our dog after him. Now we had to leave him behind with my stepmother's father. We sure were some sad-assed kids. Late into the night, the family packed. In the morning, Rodney showed up and the road trip began. The Roadrunner truck was packed to the leaf spring squatting limit, and all 5 of us kids piled into the back. The last thing our father did after we'd left all our possessions and dog behind was to throw a big, green, rotted army tarp over the top of us. He told us to hang on as he climbed into the small cab. He cranked the engine over. It turned, coughed, sputtered, backfired, and then roared to life with the rods knocking, blowing bluish white smoke from the rusty holes of the Swiss cheese tailpipe. The gears ground, the motor strained, and we backfired our way out of the driveway and started down the road. I sat at the back of the truck against the tailgate, looking out from under that damned old green army tarp, and thought about the last day of school and the days of summer that left me looking at our old house slowly disappearing into a cloud of bluish white smoke. The dusty tarp flapped and snapped over our heads as the truck roared down the road. I hauled my arm back in from over the tailgate, drew my sad blue eyes away from my summer vacation, and pulled the tarp in after me. I tucked the tarp behind my back to secure it from snapping in the wind as we rolled down the highway. The sun burned deep into the tarp, trapping us in its jade-colored heat. Our last summer as carefree boys would be plucked from our lives as carelessly as someone pulling weeds. We'ds simmer and stew on the back burner of that long, hot summer like a big pot of DNA soup on our way to becoming young men. As soon as we turned onto the main highway, Rodney pulled a bag of weed from his pocket, and in the chaos of the flapping and snapping and swirling fine green dust from the tarp, he proceeded to roll joints, and we all got very stoned. We were headed to Texas, stoned to the bone, with the fierce hot wind whipping and tearing at the canvas tarp. Stopping at a rest area, we all washed the green tarp dust from our heads and exposed body parts. Before the journey resumed, Helen told us, "I know damn well that you boys are smoking dope, and it had better stop, or else." But that didn't scare Rodney. He just rolled more joints, and the sweet smoke from the Acapulco Gold flowed over the tailgate and became one with the billowing white exhaust of the beep-beep Roadrunner. When you picture us 4 poor boys, think of the boys from that movie Stand By Me, because in fact, we looked similar and actually were quite a bit like those kids. Rodney was lean, tough-looking, naturally muscled with prominently veined thin skin, and a crew cut that looked like a cow had licked his forehead, sweeping his hair up on the right side at the hairline, leaving it in a permanent, unmanageable drift. Rodney, even as a child, had a big chip on his shoulder and was perpetually sullen and angry. I was the reader, artist, and sensitive child with deep, dark blue eyes. My stepbrother, Donnie, was somewhere between Rodney and me, and was also an artist, but a bit of a bully with green eyes and wavy brown hair. My younger brother, Ronnie, was the perfect, annoying, stubborn little brother who marched to his own beat with big brown eyes and thin, fine hair that covered his egg-shaped head. Julie had pretty brown eyes and was a slightly freckled, pigtailed, cute little sister who lived her life like a sheep amongst wolves. There were many motorists along the way who saw 4 white asses perched on top of the tailgate of that old smoking Roadrunner truck mooning them. Yes, we got our asses kicked a lot, and I will admit we deserved a good deal of those ass whippings. As we traveled, our parents would stop and ask for help from churches or police stations. These places usually provided assistance to travelers by giving vouchers for food or gas, or sometimes both. One night in Texas, my parents were given a voucher for dinner at a good old down-home cooking-style restaurant. My father parked the truck in the far corner of the lot. I'm sure we all looked a sight. You can't help but smile and shake your head in pity at the thought of our poor-assed parents and 5 dusty green children piling out of that old truck, coming into the restaurant with a food voucher. We pushed through the glass doors and into the brightly lit diner. The other diners stared at us, forks and spoons frozen in midair. The silence was deafening. I felt my face flush red-hot as we were seated. The din of the diner slowly resumed as the kind waitress made us feel at home by telling us that we could have anything we wanted on the menu. But one look from our father told us not to be greedy. I don't remember what anyone else ordered that night, but I ordered a roast beef combination dinner. Oh man, it was tender roast beef piled high on thick Texas-style bread, cut diagonally, separated with a healthy portion of homemade mashed potatoes, covered with dark beef gravy flowing over the whole of it, and ice-cold milk to drink. I will never forget that dinner. After dinner, we all piled back into the truck, and into the night we rolled with the usual symphony of sounds and smoke announcing our departure. Before we arrived in Houston, my parents had gotten another voucher for a restaurant. The old truck pulled into a small roadside diner, and our dad drove to the edge of the lot and parked under a big shade tree. He turned off the truck, where it did its usual sputtering and coughing death dance, ending with the always funny but embarrassing big bang backfire and rod-knocking belch of white smoke. The diner's waitress brought the food out. She walked up to the back of the truck where she gave each of us kids a big smile, a brown paper bag, along with a Coca-Cola in the little frosted green glass bottles that were ice cold and dripping with condensation, a stark contrast to the shimmering heat of the dusty gravel parking lot. We could smell the food even before we tore open the brown paper bags. Inside we found greasy cheeseburgers with sliced red onions, lettuce, and vine-ripened tomatoes, all wrapped in wax paper, and homemade fries in little red and white checkered paper tubs. That was another meal I'll never forget. The truck roared back into the blistering hot day and back onto the highway with the wheels making a sticky sound as they turned on the hot Texas highway. I watched the waitress waving goodbye until she disappeared into the thick bluish-white cloud of the Roadrunner's exhaust. Eventually we did make it to California, where our parents found work. I will never forget the day they showed up in the canyon where we were camped, driving an ice cream truck. I thought we'd died and gone to heaven. And that's how we lived. Each day our parents would leave us in the canyon and return around noon with food and always, best of all, ice cream. We spent a good part of that summer living in the back of that old Roadrunner truck up in the mountains in a place called Azusa Canyon. My brothers, my sister, and I played in the river by day and camped under the stars by night until our parents had made enough money to rent a small 2-bedroom house on Hines Street in Baldwin Park. Helen's brother Chuck and his wife Debbie soon arrived with their 2 children from Kansas, and the small house got smaller. If I told you these were difficult times for us, it would be an understatement. Imagine 4 adults, an infant, a blind 4-year-old girl with special needs, 4 growing boys coming of age 1 year apart, and our poor little sister Julie, all living in that 2-bedroom house. The perfect storm was brewing. Author's Commentary. Rodney was next on the hit parade of family members that were of interest to my therapist, so I did my best to bring him to life and explain how he came to such a short, tragic life ending. Rodney was born Rodney Joe Dover on February 26, 1957, to Helen Bryant and Joe Dover, and he never had a chance. Rodney was fearless and more trouble than my father could handle. To me, he was a merciless bully. My father had met and married his mother Helen 2 or 3 years after my mother's death. Shortly thereafter, he legally adopted Rodney and his brother Donnie. We became a combined family that consisted of Helen's two sons, Rodney and Donnie, my brother Ronnie, our sister Julie, and me. Shuffled together, the five of us were 1 year apart in age. We never did have a family portrait done, but if we'd had one painted, I'm sure it would have been a Vincent van Gogh masterpiece. We had moved back to Baldwin Park into that little house on Hines Street in time for my 10th grade year at Sierra Vista High School. Rodney dropped out of high school that year and started drinking and doing drugs with Chuck. Sometimes they would stay out overnight and occasionally be gone for a couple of days. So without getting bogged down in all the details, I'll say that for most of the school year we lived in a swirling tornado of flying ashtrays, fighting and screaming, and the general chaos of waking up at 4 a.m. to a blind 4-year-old girl sitting on the kitchen table in her own shit, clapping her hands loudly while baby Adam screamed and cried in his crib. My only escape was a small transistor radio I listened to as I lay on my pallet of blankets on the floor. I would cup my hands behind my ears and listen on slightly static-filled airwaves to pure rock and roll with songs like Band on the Run. I would listen to music and wish I were someone else, somewhere far away. Eventually, things got so bad that Chuck and Debbie left and returned to Kansas with their children. That gave us more space, but not much more peace. Hines Street was a neighborhood of small, single-story stucco homes with dirt yards where vagrant, homeless patches of grass grew around the base of the occasional palm tree. Mean-looking barrio dogs guarded the cactus, lemon, orange, apricot, or avocado trees that grew inside chain-link fences. And when I walked from school, I could smell tortillas cooking all the way home. Walking home one day from school, enjoying the aroma of cooking tortillas, I turned the corner onto my street and saw several police cars blocking Hines Street. I saw police officers clad in riot gear standing behind the open doors of their black and whites with M16s and shotguns wedged between the gaps. Neighbors stood on porches and on corners watching the action unfold. Looking between the patrol cars, I could see Rodney and his friend Billy Neal both lying prone in the street. A voice over a bullhorn was commanding them to put their hands behind their heads. The next thing I saw was Billy's brother swaggering out into the street. He walked right up to where Rodney and Billy were lying in the street, while the voice behind the bullhorn instructed him to also assume the position and get down and grab some asphalt. The Neals. What a bunch of redneck white trash. Here this guy was, with his brother and my brother being thrown down on by fully armored and fully armed SWAT team members, and he shows up shirtless with all his homemade tattoos plainly visible, plus a broken arm and a cast, smoking a joint. He calmly stood there talking shit to the cops. What a dumbass, I thought, as I watched the officers rush him and throw him to the ground. All three of them were handcuffed and taken away. Honestly, I can't even remember what that was all about. Needless to say, Helen and Billy's mother had them all out of jail and home in time for a late supper. It was just another day in the hood. Things finally died down and our lives went back to our normal chaos. I remember that summer well because I'd met a girl named Nancy Pendergrass who lived down the block. That was the summer I had my first real date. I used money from helping my dad on the ice cream truck and took her to a movie. American Graffiti had just come out, and that's what I took her to see. We sat in the red velvet seats in the darkened theater with our popcorn. I spent the better part of the movie maneuvering my arm behind her back. My arm was numb by the end of the movie, but as it turned out, I had not been cupping her breast as I'd imagined. I'd only been touching her inner upper arm. Looking back now, I can only smile about how sly I thought I was. My summer would again be ruined because Rodney was about to run away with Billy Neal. This time it would be serious because my heart would be broken by the death of my new first romance with Nancy. Many times over the years when my parents would fight, my brothers and sister would be all distressed, crying and shit, but not me. No, sir. I was always grinning inside. I loved it when they fought because I really wanted my dad to leave Helen. Over the years, he did leave her several times, but he just couldn't stay gone. He always went back to her with his tail between his legs. I was happy Rodney had run away. But like my dad, I knew Rodney would be back, and until he did return, there would be no peace, especially for my father. We got the bad news only days after Rodney and Billy left. They had been arrested in Clackamas, Oregon for kidnapping. The proverbial shit was about to hit the proverbial fan. The police reported that Rodney and Billy had pulled a gun and kidnapped a guy named John Phillips III and had forced him to take them to Oregon. It wasn't long till they were captured and remanded to the Clackamas County Jail. They were charged with kidnapping, robbery, and a laundry list of minor violations, including violation of probation. What a couple of morons. When word of their arrest arrived at our house, the news sent my stepmother into high overprotective gear, and my father had to deal with the fallout, or else. So off we went to Clackamas, Oregon in the beep-beep Roadrunner truck. Looking back on that trip to Clackamas, I can't help but wonder how we survived not being asphyxiated from the exhaust fumes floating up through the holes in the wooden floor of the bed of the truck. We made it to Clackamas, where we lived in a rest area for a couple of weeks while our parents made arrangements to secure the release of Rodney and Billy. One thing I hated about these sessions was that as I told these stories to my therapist, he would make discreet notes and nod his head a lot, but seldom, if ever, commented, and this drove me crazy. Chapter 5, Beep Beep Roadrunner Part 2. Oregon was cold, wet, and very green. Everything we had was damp most of the time, and living at the rest area was just plain miserable. Eventually, Rodney and Billy were released on bail, which was like some kind of miracle. The morning they were released, Helen sent them to the store to fetch some milk and donuts for the family. Rodney brought more than just milk and donuts back to the truck. Yes, sir, more than just milk and donuts. Rodney used an old trick to get the donuts. When we were young, we discovered that you could buy donuts at the bakery at the back of the store and pay for them either there or at the register up front. So no one knew, without checking, if you'd really paid in the back or not. So we would get our donuts and just walk out, which is exactly what Rodney did. And Rodney being Rodney, he had immediately run into a guy selling some LSD. He bought 5 hits of the acid with the donut money. For the uninitiated, LSD comes in several forms. One is liquid form, which can be put onto a sugar cube. Another is in a pill form, with names like microdot, orange barrel, and purple barrel. Another form is in gel-type squares, which were called window pane. And another is liquid on paper, which is called blotter acid. Blotter acid is what Rodney had bought. After breakfast, the Roadrunner truck rolled out of the parking lot just down the street from the courthouse, belching huge plumes of smoke that hung in the wet, cold air behind us like clouds of cotton candy, and backfired its way through town and onto the interstate headed home. Out on the road, Rodney tore the pieces in half and gave each of us a half hit. But after about an hour, nothing had happened, and Rodney realized he'd been burned or ripped off, and he was not happy. This was the late 1970s, the sunset fringe of the hippie era. Vietnam was winding down, and the times they were a-changing. But out there on the road, in the back of that old truck, the fringe was still alive and doing well, as we could tell by the electric Kool-Aid acid test blue VW micro bus that looked like a psychedelic version of Melville's Moby Dick as it wallowed behind us in the wake of the Roadrunner's billowing exhaust. The bus lurched, swayed, plunged, and resurfaced on the foggy waves of the Roadrunner's exhaust, staring at us with its one large glass eye. The belly of the beast was full of long-haired hippie krill, smoking bowl after bowl of hash while Jim Morrison and the Doors bled from the portals. Through copious amounts of hash smoke and looking through their kaleidoscope periscope, the hippies finally saw Rodney trying to get their attention. Using some ancient secret stoner sign language, Rodney told them that he had some hits of LSD that he would trade them for what they were smoking. The hippie's eyes went from Venetian blind slits to red-eyed, wide-open understanding, and a deal was struck. With Captain Ahab maintaining a steady pace in the Roadrunner, Rodney stepped out with one foot on the old bumper. Billy held onto the back of Rodney's jeans as he leaned into the void. The krill grill of the microbus opened and closed as it plunged forward. Bumper to bumper, Rodney leaned out, and from hand to hand, an exchange was made at about 50 miles per hour. The Moby bus dived back into the fog and was never seen again. Now, we had a ball of hashish the size of a small golf ball. This was the real deal, unlike what the hippies would find out about the acid in about an hour. But like the guy who'd sold the acid, we would be long gone by the time they realized they'd been ripped off. Having no pipe, we took a small pin and stuck it through a little piece of thin cardboard, placed a chunk of hash on it, and then lit it on fire. By placing a glass over the top, the fiery hash would start smoking and fill the glass. In turn, we would each place the glass edge to our mouth, slide it over the edge of the cardboard, suck the smoke out, light, smoke, repeat. We proceeded to get very stoned. Rodney again made another exchange from the back of the truck. He traded the remaining hash for a 6-pack of Olympia beer from some hippies in another VW microbus. Now we were sipping cold beer, stoned to the bone. That's when we realized the Roadrunner was stopping. Before we knew what was happening, our father was standing at the back of the truck glaring at us. We were busted. He told us he knew what was going on and it had better stop, or I will stomp a mud hole in your asses. I had to fight to keep from laughing as a variety of funny images played out of my stoned imagination of what stomping a mud hole on our asses would look like. The next thing my father said had a sobering effect on us, though. Boys, the brakes are bad, really bad. They've been fading, and we could be in real trouble going over Tejon Pass. So you better listen up, because if I yell for you to jump, then you better bail the fuck out, understand? We all nodded yes, of course, and I thought, oh, that's a real surprise. Fortunately, we made it over the pass okay that night. Nearing home, big old dumb Billy Neal really surprised us when he started singing a song called In the Ghetto. Billy really put his heart and soul into it there in the back of that old truck. When he finished, all we could hear was wind washing over the tarp and tires turning on a starry highway. In the dark, we wore no mask of tough youth, and I was thankful as I discreetly wiped a tear from my eye. Back in Baldwin Park, Billy went home, and our family went back to its usual chaos. As for the Roadrunner truck, well, it just backfired, knocked, and belched one last gasp of smoke and faded into the fog. Rodney would soon violate his probation by running off to Kansas, and not long after that he would follow the beep-beep Roadrunner into the fog. Tragically, he would be shot and killed in Kansas just a short time later. I've done my best here to breathe life back into the old beep-beep Roadrunner. My hope is that by reading this, you will be able to help me keep the spirit of the beep-beep Roadrunner alive. I thank you for riding along in the billowing clouds of oily smoke, backfires, rod knocks, and tears and laughter of the shake, rattle, and roll of the beep-beep Roadrunner. Author's Commentary. It is June 25th, 2018, and I am sitting here in Salinas, California on a cool day. It is 65 degrees and breezy. A large, 3-part, single-story, cream-colored, colonial-style building with a light green shingled roof rests in a Z shape on an island of lush, perfectly manicured lawn against a backdrop of gentle mountains. Extremely tall, anorexic palm trees line the western perimeter, and everything is as green as the sky is blue. As I wait for my load of strawberries, I think about Rodney's life. I hear the chink of a quarter as the cowboy punches up a song by the Doors called This Is the End. I always picture Rodney in his Levi jacket and bell-bottom jeans and those track shoes that were all the rage back then. They were lean and formed to fit as snugly on your feet as socks and typically had 3 stripes on the sides from the laces to the sole. He always had that look. That look was that of the classic James Dean, rebellious me against the world and nobody understands me look. That's how I will always remember him. I have many snapshot images, memories of him, that usually involved rebellion against the man, our parents, the school, or any other authority figure. He smoked and drank in junior high school. He brought home girls and hid them in our bedroom, and was the ringleader that promoted running away from home. He was hell on wheels, and nobody could control him. While thinking of Rodney, I flashed back to when I was in the 11th grade at Sierra Vista High School, which was the year I dropped my first real hit of LSD. I dropped acid with a guy who looked a lot like Tommy Chong, but we called him Hippie Jim. We dropped Purple Barrel acid at the house of some chick named Christy Love, just like the black female detective in a new series that came out that year called Get Christy Love. But unlike the series' star, this Christy Love was all Mexican. Yes, Mexican. It's what we called them. It's what they called themselves, because back then there was no such thing as political correctness. Today, of course, the PC term is Hispanic, to which I say, whatever. We tripped our asses off that night with this cast of characters, Christy Love, Hippie Jim, and Crazy Eddie, along with a supporting crew of assorted Mexican gang members and burnout hippies. The 5-gallon Sparklets water jug was filled with Bali High wine, mixed with orange soda and placed into the dispenser. After that, all we had to do was put our cup under the tap and fill it up. Eventually, this brew would become known as wine coolers. There were many pie pans heaped to overflowing with Colombian gold bud, and the sweet smell of marijuana smoke and patchouli incense was so thick one could hardly light a match. Later that night, everyone got the munchies, so Hippie Jim and I went to the local supermarket to resupply the orange soda and steal some steaks. We both shoved several steaks down the front of our pants while tripping our asses off and made a clean getaway. The next day was my 17th birthday. I hitchhiked back to Baldwin Park, hungover and sick as a dog. I joined Rodney and our druggy friends at school on the football field, and in celebration of my birthday, we bought a 68-cent-a-gallon jug of red wine. We all ended up getting busted before the wine was gone by the truant officer at Sierra Vista High School, and received 3 swats each from the principal with a fiberglass paddle that had holes drilled in it. We all signed our names to it before our swats. At the end of the school day, we took the long way home to get a really good ass chewing. Rodney decided to split a few days later. It was just too much pressure for him to have to toe the thin line. He was a rebel without a cause. So later that week, he told us he was going to hitchhike to Kansas. Rodney broke all the rules all the time, and that day was no different. He pulled a lid of grass from his pocket, to wit, Acapulco Gold. We, as in my brothers and I, all sat down, and Rodney got an album cover out. Back in this day, this was the preferred rolling tray. Rodney twisted up a bunch of joints. We got all smoked up till we looked like white guys with Chinese eyes. Man, that was some good weed, and like the song says, no stems, no seeds that you don't need. Acapulco Gold is badass weed. Rodney put the remainder of the bag of Acapulco Gold weed into the pocket of his Army field jacket. Hitting 1 out of every 3 steps and feeling no pain, out the door he went, and he never looked back. I remember thinking he was going to freeze his ass off out there, hitchhiking like that with nothing on but that Army jacket and his combat boots and big bell-bottom jeans. Only a few days later, we found ourselves packing and loading up whatever piece of shit vehicle had replaced the Roadrunner, and off to Kansas we went to find Rodney and scratch my father's itchy feet. Chapter 6. Snow on a Hot July Night. We arrived in Kansas a week or so after Rodney had run off, and it wasn't long before he rejoined the flock. That is where we found an old farmhouse to rent. It was not what we wanted or where we wanted to live, but it was what my parents could afford, and as usual, it wasn't much. We spent a few weeks clearing railroad ties and other trash from the house. Our fingers were almost frostbitten because it was cold as a meat locker in there. It was just plain filthy, cold, and miserable. In a few days, my dad had a fire going in the fireplace and we had water running, but no working bathroom. What we did have was a rickety 2-seat outhouse. Surprise! Just when you thought life couldn't get any better, right? Oh yes, we'd moved up in the world to a cozy 2-seater shithouse. I still can't imagine a scenario where 2 people would need to enjoy the cozy comfort of the outhouse, shitting together. We were in the middle of nowhere. That's where we were. And the one thing that could have made this boring, stuck in the middle of nowhere on a dirt road farm with a wood stove-heated house better for us was drugs. But the fact that we, as in my brothers and I, couldn't get any drugs. This is where we discovered huffing gas. Now, I have to issue a warning. Do not, I repeat, do not try this at home. Because this has to be the dumbest shit. Well, okay, maybe not the dumbest shit, but it's pretty fucking close to some of the dumbest shit we ever did. But huffing gas, after this warning to not huff gas, would be retarded. If you don't believe me, get on the internet and research the dangers of inhalants, especially gas, glue, or spray paint. I know this shit sounds funny, and I know there will be some of you knuckleheads out there who may read this and want to experiment, but I am telling the truth. Later in life, if you are lucky enough to survive as long as I have, I promise you there will be a heavy price to pay in ways you cannot imagine. There are no do-overs, no second chances. The damage is permanent and it could be fatal. It's a miracle we weren't found dead in a shed next to the outhouse from huffing gas. That would have been a shitty end to a young man's life, don't you think? The effects of inhalants on your brain is like Pac-Man with the munchies, eating brain cells faster than a fat chick home alone on a Friday night eating ding-dongs. To be so stupid as to ignore the medical facts and this personal warning would be even dumber than we were. And being dumber than we were would mean you have the IQ of a jellyfish, a jelly belly, or a jelly roll, a Jolly Rancher, a Jolly Roger, or the third base bag for the LA Dodgers. Is that clear enough? I have no idea who figured this out or where exactly we learned to do it, but it worked. And man, I mean it fucking worked. LSD? Shit. LSD got nothing on gasoline. We started by taking gas from our dad's car and then pouring it into mason jars. Then we stuck our stupid noses in and breathed deep. After a few huffs, we got the wah-wahs. We could hear and feel a warm buzzing, a sound like locusts but slower and thicker. Then the hallucinations would rise like smoke, filling our minds with fantastic visions. My first serious hallucination came while I was huffing in the old shed by the outhouse. I started huffing and got the wah-wahs real bad. All of a sudden, I saw my stepmother walking right up to me, dressed in a black dress with a black veil over her face, and she said, "I know what you're doing, and if you don't go tell your dad right now, then I'm going to do it for you. I'm going to tell him right now, so get your ass in the house and tell him, now." That scared the shit out of me, so I dropped my glass of gas and hauled ass to the house. I tore through the screen door and I walked right up to my dad sitting at the dining room table and blurted out, "Dad, I've been huffing gas." Shit. Oh yes. The shit hit the fan because right about then the effect of the gas wore off. And I stood there feeling as if I'd found myself sitting at my desk at school buck naked. Exposure took on a whole new meaning in that instant. I knew I'd really fucked up. The look on my father's face was all the proof I needed. I got my ass skinned for that one. But the truth is, it didn't stop us. I had a couple other minor hallucinations. Like one day while we were huffing, I looked through a knothole in the wall of the shed. My eyeball pupil dilated, roaming red, blinked in disbelief. I saw Charlie Brown and the whole Peanuts gang parading past her house carrying some kind of banners and looking at me with big grins. As they walked past the house turned psychedelic colors. The other memorable experience was with my brother Ronnie. We were huffing one day and I suddenly found myself in a graveyard. I was freaking out, telling Ronnie I couldn't get out of it. Ronnie said, "I'll get you out." He stood up and walked right into my graveyard hallucination, breaking the spell. Now, here is the grand prize story, the mother of all hallucinations. This shit is something that not even old Timothy Leary could have dreamed up on his best acid trip. Summer had finally arrived. My cousin Beverly, who everyone called Big B, along with her husband John Knoxstead and their children, plus a couple other aunts and uncles and assorted cousins, were all out at the house playing music, drinking wine, and playing cards. Outside, Ronnie and I were cutting up a garden hose so we could stick it into the gas tank of John's old pickup. Oh, we were some mischievous little monkeys. So, while everyone was busy inside, Ronnie and I started huffing straight from John's gas tank. I went first. After a few deep breaths of the fresh gas, I got the wah-wahs, then I huffed some more, pulling in long, deep lungs full of fresh, high-octane fumes. The next thing I knew, I looked around and it was snowing. It was so real that I held my hand out, palm up, to catch the flakes that were falling like a winter scene from a Laura Ingalls Wilder Little House on the Prairie Christmas Day. I held the hose in one hand and stood with my mouth wide open in wonder as I looked up into the hot, snowy July sky. Then I heard bells ringing, sleigh bells to be exact. I searched the snowy night sky and what to my wondering eyes should appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer. Yes, I said reindeer. It was Rudolph with his nose so bright pulling Santa's sleigh through the night. I heard Santa shouting, "On Donner, on Blitzen!" The sleigh had a golden X, like the color and glow of the McDonald's arches underneath it, and Santa was waving to me from the sleigh as the bells rang merrily. Rudolph's bright red nose led them through the snowy night as Santa shouted, "Ho, ho, ho!" As the reindeer, sleigh, and Santa descended from the snowy heavens, I could see that the sleigh had a giant green velvet bag filled to overflowing with brightly wrapped presents, candy cane-striped packages, and Christmas tree prints along with stars and angels. All the presents had big ribbons and bows. I stood and stared in amazement. Then Santa turned and took a really big present from the bag and threw it over the side of the sleigh as he shouted, "Merry Christmas!" I watched the sleigh disappear at warp speed as the present hurtled towards Earth. The giant package came crashing through the night. It got bigger and bigger and bigger. I shouted to Ronnie, "Watch out! Move! Get the fuck out of the way!" Of course, Ronnie had no fucking idea at all what was happening, but he turned and ran with me anyway. Just as we stopped and turned around to face John's truck, I saw the giant Christmas present come crashing down onto John's dusty crayon green truck. It smashed his fucking truck as flat as a pancake, like something right out of a Wile E. Coyote cartoon. I just about shit my pants right there and then. I ran to the house, where I just about tore the screen door off its hinges. I flew through the kitchen and, skidding and sliding, I rounded the corner into the living room. I caught everyone by surprise when I yelled, "John! John, come look what they did to your truck!" Everyone stopped and stared at me, and they all got up to follow me as I turned and ran back through the kitchen. I slid the last few feet on the slick, yellowed linoleum and pushed open the screen door. As my eyes focused, I saw the truck just sitting there, minding its business. And except for the chirring of a cricket, there was not another sound on that hot, muggy July night. I stood frozen on the porch, holding the screen door open, bathed in yellow bug light like a lone actor on a stage. Slowly I turned to see my audience staring at me in silence. Oh, shit. I knew I was fucked. My dad grabbed me by the arm and said, "You've been sniffing that goddamn gas again, haven't you?" I don't think my dad would have found it funny if I'd asked, "Is that rhetorical?" The rest of the family returned to the big table, shaking their heads and whispering. I really got my ass kicked for that one. Side note, when I'd sniff or huff gas, I would always hear voices, as if coming from another room through the wall. I recognized these voices. They were my father and stepmother arguing, fighting, screaming at each other. This was always playing in the background of my hallucinations. Always. Many years later, as an adult, I reflected on this memory. In my own simple way, I realized that the trauma of my childhood was stored deep in my subconscious, and those memories of violence between my father and stepmother must always be playing on a continuous looped reel over and over again, forever and ever. The magnitude of impact on a child's mind when it has been subjected to violent stimuli is dangerous and debilitating, and is as dark as it is deep, and will be with that child for always and a day. That was the year my father became more suicidal. He would walk into the woods with his .22 rifle and say he wasn't coming back. Of course, we all knew what he meant. For me personally, it caused great distress. Other times, my dad would drink Tokay wine and spend several days curled up in the bathtub with his rifle. He and Helen fought all the time. We stole their cigarettes and wine, huffed gas, and waited for it to happen. But that fatal shot never came. One day we told our parents we were going camping. Instead, our master genius plan was to walk 8 miles to town to meet up with some girls. We walked into the same woods where our father would go to kill himself, carrying our bedrolls wrapped tightly around our going-to-town clothes, and started the long walk to town. Again, I can't help but think of us at that time looking like the boys from the movie Stand By Me. We'd barely made it into town, just after midnight, when one of the 2 cops who made up the police force for Eudora, Kansas, busted us. Visions of our first hot kisses and making out in the dark in the city park were rudely exchanged for a cold, mean, yellow ticket for being out past curfew. We spent the night at our Uncle Clifford's house, and he drove us home the next day. Uncle Clifford was cool. He understood. But our dad, well, not so much. The court date was set for Monday. We didn't say anything to our dad till Sunday because we were scared shitless of him, and for good reason. When he found out he had to go to court with us on Monday, he went berserk. He beat each one of us with the infamous big black belt, then made us strip. He berated and screamed at us. And because I had patched a hole in the knee of my jeans with a flag, he put them in the wood stove and burned them. Next, he lined all of us up and shaved our heads. Really, for the next month we hauled water to the tomato plants and did other jobs under the scalding hot sun till our heads looked like